There is no such thing as a ATS proof CV. You can't buy some kind of magic CV that will circumvent these incredibly sophisticated systems. The reason why some of these things are happening at the moment is because there aren't as many jobs. There's more candidates. There's more people looking for jobs.
I got asked, what's the right font size for the ATS? Is there a font that it's more or less likely to read?
One a human can read.
One a human can read, exactly. It means they're investing their time in the wrong areas of their job search. It means that they're not customizing their CV to the human. It means they're actively reducing their opportunity.
Exactly.
So what do you think this recruiting process or this assessment process of the future looks like? What does the future version of this look like in your head? Hello and welcome to the Open to Work podcast. Super exciting one for me today because I am host to another podcast host in Matt Alder, the host of the Recruiting Futures podcast. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the show, and it's always a pleasure to be answering the questions rather than asking them for a change.
Yeah, but so we've got two podcast hosts with two Matts, both British, both talking about recruitment and the candidate universe. I mean, it's not exactly diversity on show here, is it?
Not really. We're both wearing glasses.
Yeah,
well.
both wearing glasses.
Yeah.
But no, so it's a really interesting podcast today. Matt hosts. I'll let kind of Matt introduce himself, but I really Matt's been a kind of a great guide for me as I've been kind of starting my podcast journey as someone who's kind of probably built one of the most successful recruiting podcasts in the world at this point. Matt's kind of pedigree kind of speaks for himself with the number of listens and views and the partners he works with. But the reason why I wanted to bring Matt on today was to talk a bit about kind of the future of recruiting, and that's literally the name of his podcast. So I'll stop doing the kind of introductions because I'm overdoing it at the moment, Matt. But why don't you introduce yourself, and in a way that we do with all of our hosts, with tell me a bit about yourself as if you're answering an interview question.
Sure thing. So I'm Matt. I have been working in the talent acquisition / technology space for a couple of decades now. I've stopped actually naming the number of years, probably because I've stopped counting. So I've worked in kind of all aspects of talent acquisition, started off in recruitment marketing, and have worked as a consultant for a long time, helping people with innovation in recruiting and technology. For the last nearly 10 years, I've been running the Recruiting Future podcast. It's 10 years old next January.
Wow.
And I have been, in that time, I've been exploring what the future of recruiting looks like by talking to practitioners and thought leaders and everyone kind of involved. I do two interview episodes a week, and am heading towards about 650 episodes very quickly at the moment.
Blimey, that's amazing. And so how many people tune in roughly to one of your podcasts a week, Matt?
So there's about 15,000 people who are subscribed or follow to the show at the moment. And not everyone listens to every episode. I think I'm the only one who listens to every single episode. But we get several thousand people per episode that's published.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, I've been a long-term kind of follower of the podcast, and it's kind of always, great to kind of see the trends and some of the conversations and how they've evolved over time. Why don't we skip forward, right? So your podcast is called Recruiting Future. You spend a lot of time speaking to some of the most innovative software companies in the world, and also as well as some legacy software companies as well. I mean, where do you see the kind of biggest progress being made in regards to technologies that would affect candidates, and where do you kind of fast forward a kind of a few years, maybe do kind of a 1, 2, 5 kind of horizon? Where do you think we're likely going to? How do you think it's going to change? The recruiting aspect for candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, I hope and think that we'll be in a much better place in a few years' time. I think what we've got coming up now are a few years of really sort of rapid development in terms of technology, in terms of rethinking the way that recruitment works, the kind of thing that happened 20 years ago. I think we're kind of on the cusp of one of those changes at the moment. And there's a few things that are driving it. AI is obviously a huge part of this in terms of what's possible and what's accessible to people, and also the job seekers using AI is part of that as well, in terms of the way it's exposing the shortcomings in current recruiting processes. So AI is part of it. I think also the way that companies think about skills and talent is changing, because the world is now moving so fast and skills are going out of date very quickly. And I think all of these things are driving a huge pressure for change that I can already see is going to happen. And it's not even about, I think the thing with AI is it's evolving so quickly. Sometimes it's almost difficult to imagine where it might be in 6 months, 12 months time. Although we're getting quite numb to it now. The things that we found magical and amazing 18 months ago now seem fairly run of the mill, which is always the way with these kind of changes. I don't even think it's about what's going to happen in the future. I think even the technology that's available now, the systems that are being built now, the changes that the legacy providers are having to make now will make a massive difference. And I think there's a potential for finding a job to just feel much more kind of personal again, if that makes sense. I think there's a couple of things that kind of drive that. First of all, AI automation just take away a huge kind of burden of the admin work that goes into the recruiting process. And, technically that should free people back up to have the sort of conversations that they used to have in the past.
Let's also pause there just for a second, because I think that when we say like the recruiting admin that is weighing people down, why don't we paint a picture for our listeners who are not recruiting experts? They haven't necessarily sat and see, but what are we talking about here? What does that look like for a recruiter right now? Using an enterprise legacy ATS provider like Workday, which is one of the most prevalently used around the world.
Yeah, I think it's different. I think it's different for everyone depending on their organization, because a lot of the ATSs can be quite clunky to use. They're not. The user interface doesn't feel as sophisticated as it should be. People have all kinds of internal processes with their hiring managers and trying to pin people down for interviews, and all these kind of things. So it can be a very, very clunky, disjointed process. It can feel that the technology is not actually helping in the way that it should. And even things like, properly automating interview scheduling is a massive, it sounds simple, but it's a massive leap forward for lots of organizations. And I think also, I literally was just talking to someone before I came on this call, and their team was so frustrated with the shortcomings of the ATS that they had, they went back to using Excel spreadsheets. So these kind of things are still happening.
That's not isolated. I think when people think about the ATS, and I'd love to get your take on this, but it's really only like a couple of rungs up from a spreadsheet. To the extent and lots of the kind of ways it's been used, to the extent that almost all of the reporting I've done for most of the businesses that I've ever worked in has been done on a spreadsheet, because the ATS was so poor at extracting data, basic data, which on the activities of what was happening in a process, that I tracked it manually. And that was the only way to effectively report on it in a way that I could trust. And I think if we think about this disconnect, which we'll talk about throughout this, I think, is what the perception is of what's happening in the ATS, which is this very, very high product technology, very, very sophisticated technology, to the reality where it's essentially like, imagine a spreadsheet on steroids. It's not that's probably closer to where the reality is for a big proportion of ATSs right now, versus this future kind of AI bot person that I think is potentially portrayed in lots of different kind of content.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think that, I was talking to the CEO of a big company that a big ATS company a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying how little innovation there'd been across that big ATS sector in the last 5 years. That hadn't really kind of moved on very much, and they were expecting that to to change, and I can come back and talk about that a little bit more in a second. But also, I think originally these systems were designed almost from a compliance perspective to make sure that there was the right authorization for people to recruit within the business, and that's why they were designed, and they were kind of an add-on to the HR system. And a lot of the a lot of that thinking and that purpose behind them is still there. And I think also these are quite big systems, and they can be part of a kind of a suite of HR systems that a company uses. And the larger the company, the more complex the system, and the longer it takes to change, to change provider, to reconfigure that system. And at the moment, projects to update these kind of systems can run on for years. Yeah. Now, again, I think that's going to change as we move forward. So, there is
an enterprise software business that took 3+ years to implement one of their ATSs. So if you imagine that's when you think about the enterprise cohort, if you're a candidate, of like most of the interactions you're probably going to be having with a job board with an ATS is from one of these legacy businesses that are at best running 3 years behind.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also there's so much sort of talk about ATSs online, and they're this kind of ultra sophisticated evil empire thing that will screen out your CV and all that kind of stuff. And it's a real red herring. And at the moment, I think you have to look at what the real issue is, which is the economy is turning. There's not as many jobs as there were. There are more job seekers than there were, and TA teams are being cut back. There's less recruiters than there were. So there's just a sheer the volume of applications going through the system compared to the number of recruiters that are there to deal with them is a real problem at the moment, and that's perhaps causing some of the issues that people are blaming on sophisticated ATS systems that screen people out automatically and all that kind of things. Now, it's not an excuse. It shouldn't be like this, but I think that perhaps people are looking at the wrong reasons for the problem.
So Alderson James are one of the leading people and talent agencies. Since 2013, they've been responsible for over 1,000 people and talent hires, including one in a company that I used to work at. They helped me hire my head of technology TA. So I know the guys there pretty well. They've been responsible for scaling some of the most innovative companies in the UK and the EU. Also recently just launched in the US. So even folks in your neck of the woods now, James, can get involved for contingent, retained and executive search. And they also now do embedded through AJX. So they can do it all.
So what do you think, this recruiting process or this assessment process of the future looks like? If you were to kind of paint a picture with like the different technologies you might interact with as a candidate from the moment that you kind of identify a job to the moment that you're kind of hired, what does the future version of this look like in your head?
So I think there's two scenarios that I think we could be working towards, and I'm calling one of them recruiting nirvana, and the other one recruiting dystopia. So we can talk about that in a second, but let's stick with nirvana. It's also about putting recruitment in the context of everything that's going on in an organization. So I think that we can get to the point where companies can actually really understand what skills they need in their business and when they need them. I think that's the big part of it, which means that, planning can be much more proactive than perhaps it is at the moment. So, it's kind of going back to some of the root causes there. So, an organization can understand the skills they need, when they need them, and where they're going to find them. And again, that allows the recruiting process, that's going to give it the opportunity to be, more proactive and, more user friendly. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that one of the things that's always amazed me about recruitment is there is peer-reviewed science in this industry that tells you effective ways of understanding whether someone can do a job or not. So, people go to university and do degrees and research in, assessment science and all that sort of stuff. But very few organizations actually kind of utilize that in the way that recruiting's done. And I think in the past, a lot of that has been around cost and effort and the difficulty in terms of doing that properly. Having to hire psychologists and, really spend a long time developing and benchmarking recruitment processes and all those kind of things. But I think that actually some of the assessment technology that's coming onto the market now is way more accessible. It's got a different price point. It's easier to use. It's much more involving for candidates. It's giving them feedback and things that they can tangibly use. Assessments are quicker to do. And I think to me, that seems to be the key to all of this, actually bringing some of the science of what we know. And the science doesn't say that the best way to recruit someone is to read a PDF document and have an unstructured interview. So I think that hopefully technology will unlock, what we already know and the research that's always ongoing about how you get the best fit and the best kind of future fit, and just make that easier for people. And I think that in a lot of respects, that technology, that science has kind of been locked up behind a kind of a firewall that only the biggest companies can access and not all the time. So I think that, to me, is the answer to some of this. And it does require a rethinking of the recruiting process. And unfortunately, it can take a long time for people to rethink these kind of things. But I think that the pressure coming from increase of applications because of AI is going to be a great motivator to fix this and move things forward. So I really hope we're heading towards this recruiting nirvana. I think the other thing is the ability to give personalized feedback at scale. Will be a game changer. I've seen that possible with some tools. And I think that the whole thing about, people don't necessarily like interfacing with automated systems and getting automated replies and things like that. I don't think that's true. I think people actually do if it's useful and quick and it makes the process better. And I think if you look at, as you say, our lives as consumers, 90% of the time, I'd much rather deal with a good automated system that told me what I wanted, gave me what I needed, than, hanging on a phone waiting for someone to, being on hold for a call center or something like that. And I think that in recruitment, we've just never done that well. We've never used automated processes and really thought about how we design that experience. So I think that's a challenge, but I think that actually, it'll go a long way to solving some of the issues that we see at the moment.
Mm-hmm. So I guess just to kind of replay that back, it's sort of the recruiting nirvana in your head is like a really scientifically driven assessment process that is really trying to dig deep into the science that is going to evaluate whether or not someone is right for that organization, using structured interviewing, but then also potentially things like work samples, and then also potentially things like skills-based or assessments, like a test gorilla or something like that.
Yeah, potentially. I just think it's like, generically, it's kind of better, quicker testing done in a way that's a great experience that people feel they're benefiting from it, even if they don't, they don't ultimately successful with a job, and just designed in a way that, takes into account the candidate's needs and expectations and wants and things like that. And it is possible. I've seen, examples of that happening, albeit in isolation. So I think that goes back to what I said about, the technology doesn't even have to develop any further for this to happen. It's kind of, it's there now.
Implemented effectively.
And it's just kind of, how do we get that implemented? And I think that the other, aspect of that is, all companies are looking at how they can better automate parts of their operations at the moment. And I think that, recruiting is not going to be exempt for that. So I think there'll be pressure coming from the wider organization as well for recruitment to be, more effective, more efficient, more user friendly. So I think we're kind of in this interesting time where there's lots of sort of forces pushing in lots of different directions. And I hope, I hope this is the kind of outcome that we get. I think that we will, but obviously it's not always plain sailing when it comes to these things.
You're absolutely right. Like, you kind of paint this picture of this path towards like structured and highly consumer oriented, great experiences for candidates that they gain a lot of value from, while sitting in what most organizations essentially perceive as a compliance function. And there is a lot of compliance, of course, that goes behind hiring, but which there should be. But as like you're in reality, whilst it's considered a cost center, whilst it's considered a compliance function in many respects, it's going to have this tension of, why do we need to provide good consumer experience? We're just here to extract value at the lowest possible cost. And that is the tension conversation that's happening at the moment. And the reality is that for candidates that are kind of experiencing a frustration with their process, it's because of this tension. It's because of this kind of reality where businesses are trying to reduce the cost of HR by investing in one single system and not considering what the impact is on the candidate as a result of, or actively knowing that it will have a negative impact on the candidate when they make that decision. And it's that process now trying to move towards a much more consumer oriented interaction that is the desire for many recruiting leaders and software companies around the world.
Yeah, and I think that you're painting the picture of recruiting dystopia there, which is kind of is another scenario, and that is all about exactly that, seeing recruitment just as being very transactional, automating it in a way that is just an appalling experience for people, putting in software systems without actually looking at some of the science or bias behind them. There's some kind of big dangers here. But ultimately, I think that the thing that kind of saves this is organizations, they really are thinking about, what balance of skills do we need in our business? How do we, get the people and the skills that we need? Everything is changing. Everything is changing for businesses very, very quickly. The right skills do give you competitive advantage. So I think if, I hope that we don't have to go too far down the dystopian road before, employers kind of course correct and do this. But I think that there is a very strong case to be made that actually you can have these efficiencies and everything that the organization is looking for, but you can have brilliant recruitment as well, which kind of will help the organization get a massive competitive advantage moving forward. And I think that case is, we can 100% make that case now, because we have, technology available or coming on stream that can deliver on that promise. And that's what has never been available before. And I think that's what's changed in the last 18 months.
We are delighted to be sponsored by Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations like interviews, intakes, and debriefs, and then provides a perfectly summarized note of everything that was discussed. That means that you can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. I've spoken to so many recruiters and recruiting leaders who are loving using Metaview across their organizations. It's saving them time, but it also means that they have more data to make better decisions. So for every candidate and every pipeline, hiring teams can now make confident and informed decisions, and recruiters can finally take control of the interview process. The impact on candidate experience is also massive. Since recruiters don't have to worry about taking notes in the moment, they can really focus on being present and engaged with you. Forward-thinking recruiters at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora are all leveling up their interviews with Metaview. So head on over to metaview.ai/open to work to get started for free on your first 5 calls. And then maybe just to kind of round this out, there is absolutely like a signal to noise problem, I think, in the recruiting industry as it comes to kind of what the perception is of the technologies we have access to and what the reality is. I mean, what are some of the kind of, if you were to dispel some technical myths based on the conversations that you see across like LinkedIn and other social media platforms, what would be some of the kind of realities that you'd like to kind of, encourage people to explore?
Yeah, sure. There is no such thing as a ATS proof CV, or however people describe it. There's no, you can't buy some kind of magic CV that will circumvent these incredibly sophisticated systems, because they're not incredibly sophisticated for a start. So I think it's just kind of really, I think I'll go back to what I say. It's understanding the reason why some of these things are happening. And, at the moment, it's because there aren't as many jobs. There's more candidates. There's more people looking for jobs. People are using technology to apply to lots of jobs. And that's increasing the amount of applications that recruiters have to deal with. And there's less recruiters than there were a year ago. Those departments are being squeezed. So a lot of the time, that's the reason behind this. And as I say, it's not an excuse, but it's a different set of challenges to be dealing with than thinking that this is all about, I need this ATS proof CV and I need to do things in a certain way to, beat the machine. And that's not really the, that's just not the case.
And I coach quite a few candidates. We now have our community that we're coaching people in, and I get asked this question like probably once every 3 days. We get asked like, is this, how do I make my CV ATS, like that it can pass the ATS? Honestly, every single day, like every other day, like and it's a shame because it's wasting people's time. Their hard-earned time that they should be putting into the right. It means they're investing their time in the wrong areas of their job search. It means that they're not customizing their CV to the human. It means they're actively like reducing their opportunity. I got asked, what's the right font size for the ATS? Is there a font that it's more or less likely to read?
One a human can read.
Exactly. And it's every single recruiter on the other side of this. And I think you have to, James and I talk about this all the time. It's like, you got to think about what is the motive on the person on the other side to tell you this piece of information. They probably are going to give you a low score so that you can buy and upgrade. And surprise, surprise, you have to upgrade to see the rest of their service. And to see how you can improve it. And that's the scare factor. That's the vulnerability. They're tapping into your moment of vulnerability. I think we should be really cautious about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also one of the things is, and I'm going to contradict myself here because I've just said that, not much has changed in 10 years. But I think one of the things is that, very often the advice that people get about job seeking, it's kind of out of date already because it's from someone who last looked for a job sort of 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever that is. And if you just think about how actually technology has changed the process. So if you applied for a job, I don't know, 15 years ago or something like that, there might be a closing date. There's a sense that, the recruiter is going to wait till all the applications come in before they start sifting through them. And that's a real legacy from when you had to post CVs in. So there'd be a closing date. It might be connected to an advert in a paper. It's very, very time bound. And now, of course, what happens is, a recruiter posts a job, and as soon as a great CV or candidate comes in, they'll just start the process starts. So very often people are applying, and actually there are already people moving through that process. And it's that's something that's actually quite fundamental that's changed about how recruiting is done. And it kind of goes against some of the kind of the previous norms. And I think that's also perhaps one of the issues.
Yeah. I love the idea like that one of the biggest things that's changed isn't necessarily that the recruiting process has fundamentally changed, but the advice that your people are giving and the volume advice that we're giving has been one of the biggest changes. Like, I can't imagine a world like 10 years ago where there was this much noise about what was the advice you should do and the top tips for getting through a CV. You would have been, you go and you do like, it would have been Indeed and like LinkedIn and stuff like that, but probably were the only places that you could find like job search advice, or maybe some of the ATS providers.
Exactly.
And now it is just everywhere. And it's written by content creators, not by recruiters. And obviously that's why we started the podcast. That's why we started the community, because there's just this signal to noise ratio that's a self-perpetuating problem.
Yeah. And, social media is obviously a lot to do with that, but also, it becomes a business model for people. And that, and also I've noticed that whenever, sometimes, some of these things are challenged on LinkedIn or Instagram or something like that, there are lots of people with a vested interest, sticking up and telling the recruiters who do this that they're wrong, or that's not how it works. And I think the difference is, sort of 5 years ago, it was easier to spot that. And now there's just kind of so much noise. It's not as easy to see whose advice you should be believing. And I think that's the problem. And I think also when you have algorithms that will just serve you constant, poor quality careers advice because you've started looking at it, it just becomes,
I see less and less poor quality career advice now, not because I don't engage with it in the right way. So I see less and less of it, and I see more and more people who say, well, avoid this sort of career advice, which I agree with. And I see less and less of the career advice that I don't agree with, because
exactly. And it's also such a shame that it becomes such a transactional thing. It's all about the recruiting process. It's like, oh, how'd you beat the CV? How'd you do this? And it's like, this should be about, what skills have you got? What job would you like to do? How do you bridge the skills gap? Or, what organizations are there out there that actually, you really want to work for, who would be perfect for you? The kind of research that, people should be doing around their job search and their kind of career development. It's just being drowned out by very process driven, transactional advice that, for the most part, is inaccurate at best.
Okay. And so to round us out then, in a succinct way as you possibly can, what does the recruiting process look like of the future?
Well, I hope it's recruiting nirvana. I hope that, companies know what they're looking for. They know how to communicate properly with the people that they want to hire. That they do that. And, from a candidate perspective, I would hope that technology might get people a better idea of the jobs that are a good fit for them and where they can develop their skills. The application process is beautiful. It's easy, it's quick, it gives everyone the information that they need. It gives candidates the feedback that they need, and it just leads to better outcomes for everyone. And for the first time in all the time that I've been doing this, been in this industry, I can now see a way that can happen, and that's never been the case before.
Oh, that's really exciting. And thanks, Matt, so much for coming on today and giving us a sense of the recruiting future and the candidate future that we could all kind of drive towards. Really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And so if you want to keep tuning in and hear more advice from recruiting leaders from all around the world, getting kind of the cutting edge insights on what the recruiting world is looking like, what the HR world looks like, how this is going to impact you as a candidate, and how to best navigate this job market, continue to tune into the Open to Work podcast every week. We also now have our candidate journeys episode. So if you want to see really how companies are hiring people and hear real live examples from recruiting leaders, check out that's on YouTube every Monday. And also, if you want hands-on advice, join the Open to Work community. It's opentowork.community, and you can get direct advice from ex-recruiting job search coaches from all around the world who are helping people every single day find jobs. So it's a really exciting platform, and I really hope to see you on there. Matt, where can people find you? And a little plug at the end.
Of course, you can find Recruiting Future wherever you get your podcasts, or alternatively, if you go to recruitingfuture.com, you can find all the past episodes there. And there's lots from TA leaders, HR leaders, people talking about talent, what the future of work looks like. Lots of kind of really helpful and informative stuff, hopefully.
Yeah, and even if you're a candidate, it's worth kind of just scrolling through and just seeing if there's any that particularly get your fancy, understanding what's happening on the other side and what kind of recruiting folks are talking about with each other. I think is really valuable as part of the reason why this podcast exists, right? And Matt's got a huge back catalogue of conversations. So looking at things that are kind of within the last few months to get a sense of what are the conversations that are happening right now in recruitment could be really useful for your job search as well. Awesome. Well, Matt, thanks so much again for coming on, and I'm sure we'll see you again soon. And thank you again.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Cheers. Bye-bye.